Welcome to the ThePPod.
Right then, welcome back to the ThePPod, the partnership podcast from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. And today I'm really pleased to be inviting back a friend of the show, Jackie Webb, to give us some of her expertise again in relation to motivational interviewing. So Jackie, welcome back. It's great to have you back here.
Lovely to be back. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Jackie. Well, we spent a bit of time. We've had two episodes now talking with yourself. The first one being very much a bit of an overview about what is motivational interviewing, how you can use that with families, and sort of using some of those sort of skills, techniques to really understand how we work in partnership, I guess, with families. Our last episode was also talking about sort of why is it so hard? Why is it so difficult when it seems so easy? Because on the surface, it does seem pretty straightforward. But when you kind of really dive into it, actually using some of those skills, those techniques, and really being aware of the conversation is absolutely key. So today we're going to be talking about some of those more skill-based sides of MI, and we're sort of having a bit of an overview previously. So today we're going to start getting stuck in, aren't we, about
rolling up our sleeves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be talking about change talk versus sustain talk.
That's right.
To start us off, do you want to give a bit of an overview about what are we talking about when we're talking about change talk, when we're talking about sustain talk? What does that actually mean?
So these are the two concepts that really are what makes MI different, because because MI is both person-centered and directive. So you're talking about thinking about how you're thinking about behaviour change, behavioural approaches, and a person-centered approach. It's how they're coming together. So the change talk and sustain talk, you're still keeping the person-centered aspects going in terms of really good listening skills, the partnership that you mentioned, the relationship still needs to be there. This isn't separate to that, it's integral to it. But once you get to what we call the evoking process, so you've engaged the person, you've listened to them talk a bit about themselves and perhaps their dilemma at the moment, what's going on, and you've got a clear focus. That's another thing that's important to sort of work out together before you get to this part. But once you've got engagement and a focus, what you then start to do is you start to think about listening for change talk so that you can reinforce it and increase it. And we talk about softening or reducing sustain talk. And it's the balance of those two things in the language coming from the client, for want of a better word, that contributes to increasing motivation for change.
So when we're talking about change talk, are we literally having somebody sitting there saying, I've seen the light, you're right, I need to change, I need to do these things differently?
It might be. So if I give you some examples, so really change talk is the person's desire, ability, reasons or need to change. So you might hear somebody say, I really want to get fitter. That's a clear change talk statement. But very often that will be combined with sustain talk, a reason, desire not to do it. So you might get, and that's where coming back to our first podcast, we were talking about ambivalence, where it's expressed. So you get the change talk, which might be, I want to get fitter, but I really haven't got the time. So I want to get fitter is the change talk, but I really don't have the time is the sustain talk. And in most other approaches, what we tend to do is ask the person about the sustain talk. Tell me why you can't make the time. And we start problem solving or seeing if we can get suggestions or whatever, or get them to come up with solutions to break down the barriers to change. MI doesn't do that. That's exactly the opposite of what we want to be doing. So what we try and do is we start to listen out for any glimmer of change talk and we blow some oxygen on that. So with that simple example I just gave there with that I want to get fitter, but I just don't have the time. What we want to respond to is I want to get fitter, not, but I haven't got the time. Now that doesn't mean that we might not at some point do that, but for the reasons of simplicity, that's what I want to focus on is, so we might say, so it sounds like you'd really like to get fitter. Tell me about that. Rather than, how could you make more time?
So why is that important? What's wrong with sustained talk? If we're saying, tell me about what's wrong at the moment,
Yep.
what you're finding hard,
Yep.
why is that
Why
such a
would we
bad
do
thing?
that? It's not a bad thing. Sustained talk is normal. So that comes back to that. It's not a bad thing. We should not fear sustained talk. It's a normal and natural part of the process of change for people to give voice to sustained talk. And very often when we start talking to somebody about change, there'll be more sustained talk than change talk. The natural process of motivational interviewing changes that balance. So we know from the research evidence, and this is where and you know that MI is a very heavily researched, evidence-based way of working. We need to increase the change talk because if there's more sustained talk, we know it predicts no behaviour change.
Right. Okay.
The research tells us that the more change talk there is coming from the client, the more likely it is that change will occur. We don't even need to get the person to the point of saying, I'm going to do it. Just, is there more change talk?
Mm-hmm.
So this is the bit we do instead of problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
We're increasing change talk and we're reducing sustained talk. That's it. And that can be quite hard for people to get their heads around because we're so used to, well, what could you try? Now that comes into MI, but not at this point.
So like you were saying before in our first episode, recognise ambivalence.
Yep.
And actually ambivalence very much meaning actually seeing the benefit of change.
Yep.
Whilst also wanting to remain in sort of status quo. So when we're talking about change talk, when we're talking about sustained talk, really it's kind of sort of emphasising those elements, that kind of dichotomy within us between change and stay where we are. And we know human beings don't like change.
No.
Even if it's positive change.
Exactly. It's much easier. And that's why I think often we're attracted to asking about the sustained talk because we too, we're kind of drawn to that for some reason. Tell me about, because if you think about it, if we know from the research evidence, the more the person hears themselves give sustained talk, the less likely it is that they will change. The more change talk that is produced in the conversation, the more likely it is that they will change. It sort of seems like a no-brainer, doesn't it? Well, there's something about it that's very attractive. Oh, tell me why that would be hard for you to do it. But if you ask somebody to give you sustained talk, they will happily do that all day long. But all the time they're doing that, the verbalization of the sustained talk, they're talking themselves out of it.
Well, and there's obviously a reason why somebody is in the position they're in the first place. So actually, like you say, in terms of that sort of dominance of thinking, it will be actually, well, I'm here because, taking your example of want to get fitter, but actually I haven't got time because in my new job, do you know what, I'm working long hours at the moment. When I finish work, I'm exhausted.
Yeah, it's all good reasons.
So that's already there.
Yeah, you don't need to mine for it. They'll give it you anyway. So we don't ignore that in MI, but take the example you just gave where it might be one tiny bit of change talk. I want to get fitter, but I've just started a new job. I've got 3 kids, loads more sustained talk than change talk. So we talk about softening sustained talk. So I might say, if it was you saying it to me, I might say, so actually it's quite hard to find the time. And at the same time, it sounds like you'd really like to get fitter. So I'm not dismissing, but I'm softening. So it means that we're not giving it as much attention as the change talk.
So I guess there's 2 bits in that from what you're saying. One is in terms of you and your awareness of being aware of, okay, I'm picking up on sustained talk, I'm picking up on change talk. And I mean, we talk about active listening, don't we? And I guess that's kind of real active listening when you're really kind of
tuning in
and trying to kind of, I don't know if analyze is the right word, but really kind of analyze the conversation.
Yes.
So you're not just sort of having a passive conversation where it's just happening.
That's
and this is where kind of MI comes in, like we were talking about previously, in terms of a skill to develop over time. So I guess there's that side of it. And then there's the other side of, what do you do with that? How do you actually, you talked about sort of softening, sustain,
and increasing change.
So how do you do that then?
So this is where you start to use those skills, which you call the oars, but you use them strategically. So you're not now just saying, tell me a bit about your situation and just listening. You're actually thinking, how am I going to increase motivation by increasing change talk? So as well as listening out, so going backstage, like you said before, it's tuning into it. So when I'm listening to somebody and I'm doing MI, my antennae is tuned to change talk. So it might be really brief, but I've clocked it and I'm coming back to it. Because you don't have to respond to what they end on. You can have clocked the first thing they walk through the door is, look, I know I've got a drink problem, but everyone I know drinks the same as I do, and they say lots of other things, but you hold on to, I know I've got a drink problem.
Yeah.
So then I might briefly summarize all the other stuff they've said, and then I might say, can I take you back to something you said at the start? You said, I know I've got a drink problem. Could you tell me more?
Yeah, and you mentioned the oars there at the beginning there. Can you just kind of go over that?
Sure. Yeah, sorry. Yes. So open questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summarising are the 4 tools that we use in motivational interviewing, which are, as you said, active listening skills.
Yeah.
So we're using those at this point when we're looking for change talk to respond to the change talk. So I might simply reflect back the change talk. So I've heard, I'd like to get fitter. Simple reflection, you'd like to get fitter. So that's the bit that I'm responding to. Or I might use an open question. Could you tell me a bit more about getting fitter? Not how you're going to do it. That's not yet.
Because then you're problem solving.
Exactly. Spot on. So it's just have the person hear themselves talk more about the change talk. I might affirm, you sound like someone that really gives a lot of thought to their well-being. And then after, say several bits of change talk, I might put that together in a summary. So the person keeps having their own words about change reinforced. So, but, going back to what you said about sustained talk, it's nothing to be feared. And sometimes at the beginning, there's a lot of it, a lot of sustained talk. And sometimes you might need to give that a bit of air time. But an MI practitioner is always looking for a way to go to the other side, which is the change talk. That's the productive side. And that's the bit where you really are getting busy. So apart from using your oars, you can also use some strategies to generate change talk.
Right.
So things like evocative questions. So an evocative question is one that literally evokes change talk. So I might say to that person, what concerns you most about not being fit?
Okay, so you're going to lead in that conversation of getting somebody to reflect themselves and think, actually, what else could it be?
Yeah, so it's called evoking because it's sort of pulling out, drawing out of the person, calling forth. And they might not have really thought of that before or given it voice. So you're listening for change talk, naturally occurring change talk from the person, and you're responding to it with your oars. And then you might use evocative questions. And another example of an evocative question might be, what might the benefits be to you if you did get fitter? Right. So nothing about the solution, nothing about how you're going to do this. Why? Why would you want to? That's all you're doing. All you're doing. I mean, it sounds simple, but so it's like let go of finding a solution and give more emphasis to why they'd want to do it.
And like with the evoking, if we go back to that ambivalence again, I think, I don't know, it'd be good to get your opinion, but sometimes people are sort of stuck in that because it's the way that it is, and the sort of staying the same feels more comfortable. Yeah. But there's still that, like you say, taking your example of drinking too much. Yeah, I'm presuming that a lot of people who drink too much will be there are elements of that which they won't be happy with, whether that's financial, whether that's their health, whether it's just how they wake up in the morning. Yeah. So they'll know that already. That's already there. Yeah. And so I guess that evoking is just trying to kind of push that a bit more to say, well, actually, what would it be like if you were to wake up tomorrow without that feeling? What would that feel like? Is that the sort of thing we're looking at?
Exactly. And of course, that's why it's so important that the person-centered element runs through at every part of the process of MI, because the person isn't going to be willing to go to that with you if they feel you're going to judge them or you're trying to get them somewhere. So all the things about, acceptance, it's up to them if they make the choice, the empathy of how difficult it might be to even consider this stuff, all of that needs to run through whilst you're evoking. And being ready to kind of lean back much more into the relationship. If you start to feel, the pushback of, look, you clearly don't get it, if you need to, change tack.
And are there times with it where you think actually we might need to pause this and come back to it another time, or are there kind of techniques you can use to kind of pull it back from that sort of situation?
Both, really. So I wouldn't run away if I was getting pushback. That's normal as well, but it would tell me something. So if I was having a very kind of productive conversation and suddenly someone started pushing back, rather than blaming them, I'd think, what did I just do there? Did I push them too quickly? And
that goes back to what we were talking about in the first episode, isn't it? About that sort of shifting that dynamic, I guess, isn't it? And that reflection of saying, rather than saying they are resistant to change, there's disguised compliance to change, they're not wanting to change, actually reflecting it back and saying, actually, do I need to do something different here?
Exactly. So we're quite nimble in MI. We're being responsive. So at any point, I might have been, got to the evoking process. We're looking at change talk and sustain talk. And suddenly, we don't know what's happening for somebody internally. You might have hit a nerve. But rather than keep going at that point, I might lean more into engaging again and just empathy and coming alongside. But then, trying to get some direction again and think about change when things are back on track, which they tend to get back on track fairly quickly if you're responsive.
So, and again, that's quite a skill, isn't it? Of not sort of necessarily progressing along a linear path.
No.
If we do this, then we do that, then we do this, and then we start evoking, and then he's actually having that skill, again, that real active listening, to be monitoring the conversation and your part in it as well, to say, actually, no, we need to go back to, to our reflections, for example.
Exactly. Just back to the relationship and keeping them in the room, properly in the room. Because, you can sense that it's gone wrong for some reason. That's okay. As you say, go back to reflecting, empathy in particular.
So what are some of the techniques that you can use? You mentioned about evoking.
Yeah.
Are there other techniques that you can use?
Yeah. So aside from evocative questions, another one that I particularly like is scaling. So scaling is used in a lot of different approaches, but in motivational interviewing, we only use scaling to ask about the importance of making change, which is how concerned or worried is somebody, and their confidence about their ability to make change. So we would say, so on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is not at all important and 10 is really important, how important is it for you to stop drinking?
That's quite important to emphasise here, isn't it? Because quite often when we talk about scaling, or quite often as it's interpreted scoring, it can have some quite negative connotations, isn't it? And actually, from what you're saying, is the important bit, again, is that person-centred approach.
Yes.
To be actually, for you, what does this feel like for you?
For you.
And how achievable is this for you? As opposed to, I think you're here.
And you're right. And sometimes when practitioners have used scaling, they've done it in a way for themselves and for their organisation, to write a score in a book somewhere or in notes. This isn't about that. It's and in fact, with the number, so Steve, if you don't mind choosing a number, if that was you, for example, I'm not saying you got a drink problem. If you were talking about drinking to me, and what number would you give?
So if we say, okay, so if I'd say, well, I'd say probably a 6 today.
Yeah. Now, at that point, it's really important that I don't go, 6, wow. Or, 6. You're almost like a neutral observer to the person's process. So that doesn't mean like impassive or stony-faced, but 6, completely 6. What makes you a 6 and not, say, a 2?
And so at this point, I could be sort of, again, it's that encouraging that reflection, isn't it? And going, well, actually, I don't know, why am I a 6 more than a 2? And I guess, well, actually, today I don't feel quite so bad about it. I've been in real low places before. I've sort of feel like I've hit rock bottom, and sort of actually I'm not in that place that I was at previously. And just feels something that might be, maybe more achievable at this point, potentially.
Yeah. So, and what you're starting to give more of, and which is the purpose of scaling, is more change talk, which I would then respond to. But it's always why this number and not a lower number. Never why not a higher number. Because if you ask why not a higher number, you get sustained talk.
Right.
So it's always why a 6 and not 2 or 1 or whatever. And then on a scale, when we're looking at confidence, it's the same thing, but it's a slight. So you're getting change talk from the importance ruler. From confidence, the confidence ruler, you're getting ability talk. And very often that is what gets in people's way. They know it's important to get their kids to school, but they don't think they can.
Yes.
So, you're kind of, it's giving you a bit of a clue about where you need to focus your attention.
Well, it's like we talked about before with smoking, isn't it? Yeah, I don't think there's a smoker in the world that doesn't know that smoking is bad for you. And you can give them 101 leaflets to say why it's bad for you and what it does to your health and everything else. And actually you're just reinforcing what they already know. Exactly,
which is quite patronising. Yeah.
So I'm with you. You mentioned about the scaling then, and you'd always sort of say, so why not? Yeah, why a 2? Well, why not a 2? Why a 6? Why not a 2? Would you in any sort of circumstances, I know you talked about sort of not going higher, but would there be instances where you'd say, okay, well, so what, you're a 6 at the moment, so what would it look like for that to be 7?
Yeah,
would you use that?
You could use that as a supplementary question, but it would always only be 1 higher.
Right.
So particularly with confidence, actually. So say somebody was a 4 on confidence, so I'd already asked them, so what makes you a 4 and not a 2? Even if it's a 2, why not a 2 and not a 0? It doesn't matter what the number is.
Well, it's a bit like when you go to the hospital and they ask you to rate pain.
Yeah.
How painful is this, between 1 and 10? What the number is in a way is irrelevant because it's personal to them, isn't it?
Exactly. But you might then say, what, if it was confidence, what would need to happen? What would you need to do to get that up to a 3?
Yes.
And then just look interested, wait. Because remember, you're asking somebody to really think. Don't jump in.
And we don't like apps. We jump in there straight away.
Yeah.
Which, again, then instantly brings us back to wanting to be that problem solver, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, well, they've gone quiet.
And the rescuer.
Oh, God, okay, I've got to...
Yeah.
Well, how do you feel about this? What would that be like?
Yeah, exactly.
What about this? That sort of thing.
Be a little bit... Yeah, try and increase your tolerance to silence if you can. I know that's hard. But yes, so scaling is another really helpful one. I like them anyway. And if you don't like numbers or your clients don't like numbers, you can get creative. So you could just draw a line on a piece of paper. And on one end you say, if here is important and here the other end of the line is not very important, where would you put yourself on this line?
Yeah.
And why there and not lower? You can still have the conversation without even using numbers.
Yes.
So that's another way.
Are there any traps that people fall into in terms of sort of evoking change talk? Are there kind of common pitfalls that people tend to kind of drift back into or anything? Or
yeah, there are. So one is not doing it for long enough. So you can sort of just get a couple of bits of change talk and go straight to planning,
right,
which is the how would you do it. Now, that might be fine if you get the person saying, they're pretty ready when they walk in the door. But, it's almost like giving it enough attention, getting the person almost to tell you when they're ready. You can sense it when somebody's ready for the how, because they're quite likely to say, well, maybe I could do X, or, they've just kind of, the steam's gone out of why they can't do something. You can kind of tell when somebody's ready for planning. So don't rush it is one thing.
And particularly with that, if you've been in a situation which you, as somebody working with a family, have found it quite challenging, quite difficult for you to kind of go, we've got to get here. We've got to really use my mental ability to kind of really tune into this conversation. And there's been lots of sustained talk and I've been working really hard to get this change talk. And suddenly, it's there.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank God for that. We've achieved that now. Let's move on.
that's the other thing, like we were talking about, it doesn't mean that it won't go back. It's a bit like a pendulum.
Yes.
And we have to be, well, because, we describe MI as a dance, we have to be prepared to lean into the dance and not be a cheerleader for change talk.
Yeah.
Sometimes when there's only a little breath of change talk, it's hardly anything. You think, oh, I want to respond to that, but there's ever such a lot of sustained talk. We need to, if you like, be a bit cool with it. So so the person will sense if you're kind of being a bit too cheerleady about a tiny bit of change talk that hasn't meant much to them yet. So it's like understate it a little bit. In fact, using words like, so let's say somebody, going back to our fitness one, I know it's important to be fit, but mostly I'm fine with it. I don't like exercise and I don't have any time anyway. So it's not really great change talk at the moment. We can still blow a bit of oxygen on it though by understating it. So again, I might say, yeah, so you're not really seeing the need for yourself, that you kind of don't really even like exercise. I'm hearing that loud and clear. Sounds like that, like there's a little bit of you that's sort of wondering about your fitness.
Yeah.
So you're toning it right down. So yeah, there's that. There's nuance to this, responding to the person that's with you here and now. But of course, that's along the line. When you first get started with thinking about change talk and sustained talk, don't worry too much, because the person will give you immediate feedback. If you're getting more change talk, you're doing something right to keep doing it. If all you're getting is more sustained talk, have a think about what you're doing, because that's kind of the wrong direction.
So are there other techniques you can use at all?
Yep. So another one is pros and cons. So this is particularly helpful if you've got somebody where it feels like there's really very little change talk coming, but they're engaged, they're willing to talk to you. So it's not like there's like huge pushback, but they're just saying, it's not really a problem. So you might say, well, what is it you like about your drinking, your smoking, not taking exercise? So then you might give a bit of airtime to that. But you're not going to say, give me an example of, why you like, give me the last time you went out and drank with your friends, describe it in detail. You're not going to do that, but you're just going to respond and say, so you like drinking, it's something you enjoy socially. You're understating it a bit, but the reason you're doing that is so that once you've listened to what they like about it, they're more likely to be willing to go to the other side when you say, do you want me asking, is there something maybe that you're not so happy with, maybe not 100% with your drinking? They're more likely to go there with you if you've given some airtime.
Okay, so
the other side.
That dancing again. Yeah. It's again, it's developing that empathy, isn't it? That understanding, that person-centered approach. You're not ignoring what somebody's saying.
No,
and like we talked about before with ambivalence, actually, you can't ignore that, because actually, there might be some perceived benefits for it. Actually, I get to go out and see my mates, have fun.
There would be some losses.
Had some great nights out, this, that, and the other. But and
exactly.
That's the key bit.
Exactly. Yeah. People aren't doing these behaviours for no reason, are they? So it really is about carefully responding to where they are. But if it is something like, somebody monitoring their sugar levels and they're diabetic, this could be really important stuff, for their health, for their life. If we're talking about somebody who's hitting their children, these getting their children to school, these are things where, we could really help make a difference if we think about how we're responding to those conversations.
So are there any other techniques at all, or?
Well, I think that the blowing, what I kind of call blowing a bit of oxygen on it, is probably the best. It's the naturally occurring change talk that is probably strongest, but we tend either not to hear it or not to do anything with it. So let's say somebody said, I don't know, I know it would be good for me. I'd feel a bit better if I did some exercise, but I just don't feel like it. You might say, in what way would you feel better? So that's the bit where you've heard a bit of change talk and you are asking them to go deeper. What do I mean by a bit better? And it's them hearing themselves speak aloud. Often people say, in response to MI, it made me think. So that's what you want. You want to leave the person with nothing to push against because you haven't told them to do anything. You haven't tried to persuade them. All they've got is their own words echoing in their heads when they leave. And those words hopefully are mostly change talk.
So in terms of MI, I know it's always kind of changing, evolving as practice is at the time. Have you got an example of that in relation to what we're talking about here with change and sustain?
Yeah, definitely. So some people might be familiar with an expression, rolling with resistance, and that was something that MI got quite well known for early on. That language has changed. It's evolved, as you say. So we don't use that expression anymore. So we now talk about responding to sustained talk and discord, which doesn't have quite the same ring to it, I know. But the reason for the change was Miller and Rolnick felt this discomfort, really, with describing clients as resistant to change. When, of course, what we know is it's more likely that they're ambivalent about change, not unmotivated and not being difficult. I mean, if you think about when you struggle to make change yourself, you're not being difficult, you're just saying it as it is. So they separated these two terms out. So sustained talk is where somebody is giving reasons or desire not to change. That's different from discord. Discord is where there's a problem in the helping relationship between the speaker and the listener. So that could be, well, what do you know? I bet you haven't even got a kid.
Right.
That's discord. Sustained talk is, I'm not sure if I even want to change. They're different. How we respond to them is pretty similar. And it's usually if there's a lot of sustained talk or there's discord, we've got to deal with it. Because if we don't, you're not going to get to the change talk. But if there's, a bit of sustained talk and there's change talk, don't worry too much about it. Head for the change talk. But if there's loads of sustained talk or discord, you're really back to the relationship because in leaning in and acknowledging and validating that position.
Yeah. And when you talk about actually addressing it, I know if we're in a situation where there's a lot of discord, whereas do you know what? You've really peeved me off.
Yeah.
And you're not understanding what I'm talking to you about here. Blah, blah. And how would you address it? Do you literally kind of name the elephant in the room or?
Yeah. So you go back to those skills of engagement, which you talk about coming alongside. So you're not at that point trying to get to change at all. You're just trying to get the relationship back, which one of the things you might do is apologise, actually. I'm really sorry I got that wrong. And you didn't like it. And you look like you're really angry with me. So so that kind of fits with what you're saying about the elephant in the room. But what you're really doing is you're using reflective listening, apology. You might affirm you really do know your kids better than anyone else. You must have felt like I was trying to tell you what to do with your kids. So, you might affirm. So there's lots of things you can do, but essentially it's that listening and not trying to do anything other than get the relationship back.
And then, like you say, that self-reflection and like we've talked about previously, recognising actually the person is the expert in their life.
Yeah.
You're there to support
with
right. that change and walking alongside them with that process.
Mm.
And actually, like I say, it might be that self-reflection and honesty, that open, transparent practice.
Absolute transparency.
Actually, I can see what I've said. I've maybe made some presumptions about your situation, which actually, may be incorrect. And so do you mind just kind of, help me to understand? That'd be a sort of approach you'd be looking to take.
I would probably let them respond to the empathy first rather than, tell me about that.
Yeah.
That would be helpful kind of once they've kind of responded, because they might need to vent a little bit. Yeah, because you didn't, I was telling you about my stuff and you just went, So they might need to respond to that first. But absolutely, then you need to look for direction again.
And I think that asking for clarity sometimes, and like we talked about in terms of those reflective statements, actually it's showing that you are engaging, you're wanting to understand, you're being open and honest about it. That good communication feedback loop, isn't it? Actually, can you help me to understand this? Because I'm struggling with that a little bit at the moment.
Yeah. And trying to sort of take your own ego out is quite difficult as well, because sometimes when you feel like someone's attacking you, instantly you want to defend yourself. So if someone says, I don't know, I've had 6 workers in the last 3 months and now I've got to tell you all over again. Instantly we might want to say, well, I'm sorry, but, there's been we've had trouble recruiting, Person doesn't want to hear that. That's not going to help. They're going to disengage from that. So it's almost like, actually try and put that outside of it and think, how are they feeling right now? They're feeling let down, angry, annoyed that they've got to tell their story again. That's what we're trying to respond to, rather than defending ourselves.
I think it's sometimes moving it away from what you represent. Again, talking about that relationship.
Yeah, the organisation.
Yeah, you at that stage, for your example, I've had loads of workers in before. They've turned up, they've not done anything, they've gone away, and you'll hear another one asking me to tell it all over again. Yeah, I'm done with it. Actually, at that point, you're not representing you. No. You are representing the organisation.
And remembering that. Yeah.
And so again, it's about that building up that relationship, isn't it? And seeing you as a person as well as seeing them as a person.
Exactly. Yeah, and also not trying to say, well, I'm going to be different. It's like, show them. So
just, if we can just kind of recap then for a minute, if that's okay. So talking about change talk as opposed to sustained talk. Sustained talk is anything really which somebody is vocalizing, which is about why they should remain in the status quo. Change talk is anything that could be seen as, actually, if I did this, that kind of thinking ahead. Is that a kind of way to put it? That's probably not the best way to put it.
How it might be if they make change,
Yeah. And then in terms of that, we've got the active listening to really sort of cue into these things. And we've got some of the techniques there. You talked about the oars there, where we can kind of, work with that relationship building, but also be tuning into that change talk. And the more we can pick up on the change talk, the more we can encourage somebody to have change talk, the more likely it is that they're going to be hearing themselves, and the more likely it is that change will happen.
Exactly.
And then within that, we've got a number of techniques to use, which I'm going to forget them all now, but we talked about evoking. What else do we have?
Asking evocative questions, so questions that literally ask for change talk, because people tend to give you what you ask for. So don't ask them for all the reasons why they can't do it.
Yep.
They'll give you that for nothing. Ask them why they might want to change.
Yep. And some of the techniques we talked about in terms of scaling.
Yep.
But the important thing around that is actually, for them, where do they feel they are at the moment? And actually, again, it's about that change talk of working with that ambivalence and actually recognise that ambivalence. Say, okay, well, like we used their example. So you're a 6. You're feeling like you're a 6 at the moment. So why not a 2?
Yep.
So you're getting them to go, actually, yeah, why not a 2? Why could that be different? There, and some of those techniques we can use to really kind of tune in, really just kind of encourage that change talk without getting ahead of somebody.
Yeah, exactly. And basically this podcast has been about talking about what you do instead of problem solving. And it's like, let go of finding a solution. This is what we do. We're building change talk. We're reducing sustained talk. That's it.
Simple as that.
Simple as that. That's all you've got to do.
Wonderful. Jackie, thank you so much for coming back to us again. It's always enlightening, I think, having these conversations, because there are things we get stuck into our way of working, don't we?
Yeah.
And just kind of, we get quite comfortable with that. And actually, I think from everybody that I know that uses motivational interviewing in their daily practice, it is about becoming comfortable with it. The more you practice it, the more you use it,
absolutely,
the more natural it becomes.
Yep. And remembering, at the end of the day, you've got a consultant with you the whole time, and that's your client. If you're responsive to what they're saying and kind of flexible in what you're doing, you can't really go wrong, can you?
Hopefully not. In terms of sort of moving forward, would you be able to demonstrate this to us at some point? We have an MI conversation, and then maybe we can come back and kind of
that sounds
reflect
like
on
a good idea. Why don't we do that?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, Jackie Webb, thank you so much again for your time today.
It's
really
my
appreciate it. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you.
See you again next time.
See you, Steve.
Thanks, Jackie.
Bye.
Bye. As always, if you'd like to find out more details on the topics discussed in today's episode, go to the SSCP website at somerset-safeguardingchildren.org.uk or by following any of the links in the description. If you have any questions or comments arising from today's episode or would like to be involved in future episodes, we'd love you to get in touch with us at ThePPod@somerset.gov.uk. If you enjoyed today's episode, Jackie will be back with us again, where next time we'll be holding a conversation using MI techniques and seeing how the theory can really be put into practice. Don't forget as well that Jackie is currently running 1-day Introduction to Motivational Interviewing training, which is being fully funded through the SSCP. So go to our training page to book your free space now. My thanks once again to my guest today, Jackie Webb, Motivational Interviewing Trainer, for coming in to talk to us. And my thanks to you as well for listening. My name is Steve Maccabee, and I'm the Training Manager for the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. And I look forward to you joining us again next time at ThePPod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.